99% of you are not subscribed to the channel. At 1,000 subscribers, I will post a series of special stories. Subscribe now. Captain John Reynolds was not someone who got scared easily. He had spent most of his life in space, exploring distant parts of the galaxy, searching for knowledge, treasure, and sometimes just a good story. His bravery and smart tactics made him famous among the best explorers in the galaxy, but it also gave him many enemies who would love to see him fail. As the huge ship, Orion 5, raced through space towards the planet Zura 9, Reynolds felt a strange feeling inside. He couldn't tell if it was excitement, fear, or a mix of both. The planet ahead looked dark and scary, with jagged landscapes and constant storms under a fading star. The storms on Zura 9 were wild, shooting lightning and fire across the sky. It was the kind of place that other explorers stayed far away from, and for good reason. The stories about the planet were terrifying. They told of the Zeroths, a tribe of alien females known for being savage and always hungry. Survivors described them as towering creatures, covered in hard armor, with glowing eyes that seemed to look into your soul and mouths full of sharp, needle-like teeth. The Zeroths were relentless hunters, attacking anything that crossed their path. No one had ever come back from Zura 9. Ships were often found drifting near the planet, their crews missing, or just piles of bones. It was said the Zeroths kept trophies from their kills, and their homes were filled with the remains of those who challenged them. But Captain Reynolds wasn't afraid. He had faced worse challenges before, and the treasure waiting for him on Zura 9 was too important to miss. Buried in the ancient ruins on the planet was a piece of technology that could change the future of the galaxy, a limitless energy source made by a long-lost civilization. The information had come from a trusted friend who had spent years studying the legends of the ancients and had finally found a way to pinpoint the location of the ruins. The potential of such a discovery was staggering, with the galaxy embroiled in constant warfare over dwindling energy resources. This technology could put an end to the conflict, providing clean, unlimited power to every corner of the universe. The implications were enormous, and Reynolds had never been one to shy away from a challenge, but as the Orion 5 descended through Zura 9's thick, toxic atmosphere, he couldn't help but feel a sense of fear. Boing, the ship shuddered as it passed through the planet's violent storms, the viewports flashing with bursts of lightning. Reynolds gripped the armrests of his command chair, his eyes scanning the controls as he guided the ship toward the designated landing site. Captain, we're picking up unusual readings, said Lieutenant Mart Vasquez, his second in command. Her voice was calm, but Reynolds could see the tension in her posture as she studied the data on her console. What kind of readings? Reynolds asked, keeping his voice. Energy signatures, sir, strong ones. They're coming from the surface near the ruins. It's like nothing we've seen before. Reynolds frowned. The technology they were after was supposed to be dormant, buried deep within the ruins and untouched for millennia. If it was active now, it could mean that they weren't the first to find it, or worse, that the Zeroths had somehow learned to use it. Prepare for landing, he ordered, and keep an eye on those readings. I want to know if anything changes. The crew moved quickly, adjusting the ship's descent and securing their stations despite the tension in the air. They were professionals, each one handpicked by Reynolds for their skill and bravery. They had been through many dangerous missions together, and there was an unspoken bond between them, a trust that went beyond words. As the Orion 5 broke through the cloud cover, the surface of Zura 9 came into view. It was even more desolate than Reynolds had imagined, a vast barren landscape of sharp, craggy rocks and deep-shadowed valleys. The only signs of life were the twisted remnants of long-dead trees and the occasional flash of movement as small, skittering creatures darted between the rocks. But the most striking feature was the wreckage scattered across the plateau where they were set to land were the remains of other ships, some ancient, their hulls rusted and worn, others more recent, with scorched and twisted metal showing signs of HFY, and the sight of so many ruined vessels sent a chill down Reynolds' spine. It was a graveyard, a testament to the planet's deadly reputation. Looks like we're not the first ones to try this, Vasquez remarked, her tone grim. Leighton, make sure we're the first to leave, Reynolds replied, trying to shake off the unease that had settled over him. The ship landed with a heavy thud, its landing gear sinking slightly into the unstable ground. The crew ran through their post-landing checks quickly and efficiently, but there was a palpable tension in the air and unspoken awareness that they were in hostile territory. Reynolds rose from his seat and grabbed his helmet, securing it over his head with a practiced motion. The atmosphere outside was toxic, the air thick with sulfur and other noxious gases. Even with their suits, they would have to be careful. Prolonged exposure could be lethal. Suit up, everyone, he ordered. We move fast, we move together, stay alert, and stay close. We get in, we get the tech, and we get out. Understood. A chorus of affirmatives echoed through the comms as the crew donned their gear. Reynolds made his way to the airlock, his heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and dread. He had faced countless dangers in his career, but something about this mission felt different, as if the planet itself was watching, waiting for them to make a mistake. The airlock hissed open, and Reynolds stepped out onto the surface of Zura 9. The ground crunched beneath his boots, the sound muted by the thick atmosphere. The sky above was a swirling mass of dark clouds, occasionally lit by flashes of lightning that cast eerie shadows across the landscape. Ahead of them, the ruins loomed, massive ancient structures carved from the black stone of the planet, their surfaces etched with strange glowing symbols that pulsed with a faint light. They looked almost alive, as if the stones themselves were breathing, waiting for something or someone. This place gives me the creeps, muttered Sergeant Lucas Kane, the ship's weapons specialist, as he scanned the horizon with his rifle. Stay sharp, Kane, Reynolds replied. We've got a job to do. They moved cautiously toward the ruins, the tension growing with every step. The wind howled around them, carrying with it the faintest of sounds, whispers perhaps, or the distant echoes of something moving in the darkness. Reynolds couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that unseen eyes were tracking their every move. He glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to see shadows flickering in the distance, but there was nothing, just the barren, lifeless landscape, stretching out in all directions. Captain, we're approaching the main structure, Vasquez reported, her voice crackling slightly over the comms. Reynolds turned his attention back to the ruins. The main structure was enormous, a towering edifice that seemed to defy time itself. Its surface was covered in the same glowing symbols, but they were larger here, more intricate, as if they were telling a story long forgotten by the galaxy. As they reached the entrance, a massive archway carved with depictions of strange, elongated figures. Reynolds felt a sudden rush of energy, a tingling sensation that coursed through his body. The air around them seemed to hum with power, and the symbols on the walls began to glow brighter. This is it, Reynolds said, more to himself than to the others. The technology is inside, but before they could step through the archway, the ground beneath them began to tremble. The air grew thick with static, and a low, rumbling sound filled the air, like the growl of some massive beast awakening from a long slumber. Reynolds's heart raced as he realized what was happening. The stories were true, the Zeroths were real, and they were coming everyone back to the ship. He shouted, but it was too late. From the shadows of the ruins they emerged, towering figures covered in dark chitinous armor, their eyes glowing with a predatory light. The Zeroths moved with terrifying speed, their bodies rippling with muscle as they charged toward the crew. Reynolds barely had time to raise his weapon before the first of them was upon him. He fired the shot, hitting the creature square in the chest, but it barely slowed down. The Zerth LED out a roar that shook the ground, its claws swiping at Reynolds with a force that sent him sprawling to the ground. The crew fought back valiantly, their weapons blazing as they tried to fend off the attackers, but the Zeroths were relentless. They moved as one, a well-coordinated pack cutting down the crew with brutal efficiency. Reynolds struggled to his feet, firing at the nearest Zerth, but his shots only seemed to anger it. The creature lunged at him, its jaws snapping shut inches from his face. Just as he braced himself for the end, a massive explosion rocked the ground beneath them, sending the Zeroths scattering. Reynolds looked up to see one of the ancient structures collapsing, the symbols on its surface flickering and dying in the confusion. The Zeroths hesitated, their attention momentarily diverted. Reynolds seized the opportunity, grabbing a fallen crew mate's weapon and firing it into the ruins. The blast hit something vital, and the entire structure began to collapse in on itself, taking several of the Zeroths with it fall back. Reynolds shouted, his voice horror from the strain. The surviving crew members regrouped, making a desperate dash for the Orion V. Reynolds covered their retreat, firing at the pursuing Zeroths with everything he had left. The creatures were relentless, but they seemed reluctant to leave the ruins, as if something was holding them back. As they reached the safety of the ship, Reynolds risked a glance back at the ruins. The Zeroths had stopped their pursuit, gathering at the entrance to the main structure. The leader, the largest of them all, stood at the forefront, her glowing eyes fixed on Reynolds for a moment. Their eyes met, and Reynolds felt a strange sensation, as if the creature was peering into his very soul. Then, with a low growl, she turned and vanished into the darkness, her warriors following close behind. Collapsed against the bulkhead as the airlock sealed shut, his body trembling with exhaustion. They had survived, but barely. The Zeroths had let them go, but he had no illusions about what that meant. They would be back, and next time there would be no escape. But as he caught his breath, a new resolve began to form in his mind. The technology was still out there, buried deep within the ruins. The Zeroths were guarding it for a reason, but Reynolds was determined to find out why. He had faced the ravenous alien females and lived to tell the tale. Now it was time to finish what he had started. The air inside the Orion Phi was thick with tension as Captain John Reynolds and his crew regrouped in the ship's dimly lit interior. The once confident, battle-hardened crew now wore expressions of shock and disbelief. The encounter with the Zeroths had shaken them to their core. The stories they had heard, the warnings they had dismissed as mere legend, were all too real and far more terrifying than they had imagined. Reynolds wiped the sweat from his brow, his hands still trembling from the adrenaline. He had narrowly escaped death, but his mind raced with thoughts about what to do next. They couldn't leave yet. The technology they were after was too important to give up, even with the great danger around them. "Captain, we barely made it out alive," Vasquez said, her voice shaky with fear. "We've lost half the crew. We should cut our losses and get out of here while we can." Reynolds looked at the remaining crew members. Their faces were pale, and their eyes showed the fear from seeing their fallen friends. But he also saw determination in their eyes, reflecting his own strong will. "We're not leaving," Reynolds said firmly. "We came here for a reason, and we're going to see it through." "But Captain," Kane interrupted, his voice tense, "those things are unlike anything we've faced. We can't fight them head-on and expect to survive." Reynolds nodded, knowing Kane was right. The Zeroths were more dangerous than he had thought. But every creature had weaknesses, and the key to surviving was to use those weaknesses against them. "We won't engage them directly," Reynolds said, already planning. "Our priority is the technology. We'll move in small teams and stay low. If we can get to the core of those ruins and take what we need before they notice us, we might make it out alive." Vasquez frowned, clearly worried. "What if they catch us? We barely held them off last time." Reynolds looked her in the eye, his expression serious. "Then we fight, but on our terms, not theirs." The crew exchanged uneasy looks, but eventually nodded in agreement. They knew the risks, but they also understood what was at stake. This was their chance to make history and bring back something that could change the galaxy forever. Reynolds moved to the ship's armory, grabbing more weapons and gear. He gave out orders with the precision of someone who had led many missions before, each one more dangerous than the last. His confidence was contagious, and he could see the fear in his crew's eyes slowly turning into determination. "We'll split into 2 teams," Reynolds said, slinging a high-powered rifle over his shoulder. "Team A will create a diversion to draw the Zeroths away from the main structure. Team B will go in, secure the technology, and bring it back to the ship." Vasquez raised an eyebrow. "And who's leading Team A's?" Reynolds gave her a tight smile. "I am." The crew reacted as he expected, with a mix of respect and concern. Vasquez opened her mouth to protest, but Reynolds silenced her with a sharp look. "I'm not sending anyone into danger I'm not willing to face myself," he said. "Besides, I'm the one they seem to be interested in. I'll make sure they stay focused on me." Reluctantly, Vasquez nodded. "Understood, Captain. Will be ready as." They finished suiting up. Reynolds took a moment to study the faces of his crew. They were good people, the best he had ever worked with. He knew he was asking a lot of them, maybe too much, but he also knew they wouldn't back down. "Not now." "All right, Leighton, move out," Reynolds said, his voice carrying a note of finality. The airlock opened with a hiss, and the crew stepped out into the harsh, unforgiving landscape of Zura 9. Once more, the sky was a tumultuous sea of dark clouds, and the wind howled as if in warning. The ruins loomed ahead, dark and foreboding, their alien architecture casting long shadows across the rocky terrain. Reynolds' LED team, consisting of himself, Kane, and 2 other crew members, seasoned veterans who had seen their share of combat. They moved quickly and quietly, keeping to the shadows as they approached the outskirts of the ruins. The plan was simple: make as much noise as possible, draw the Zeroths out, and lead them on a chase that would keep them far from the main structure. Team B, led by Vasquez, would follow closely behind, slipping into the ruins once the Zeroths were occupied. Their objective was to locate the core chamber where the technology was housed, extracted, and return to the ship. As they neared their target, Reynolds signaled for his team to halt. They were close now, close enough to see the faint glow of the symbols etched into the walls of the ruins. The air was thick with tension, and every sound seemed amplified in the oppressive silence. "Remember, stay low. Stay quiet," Reynolds whispered over the comms. "We go on my mark." C nodded, his grip tightening on his weapon. The others mirrored his readiness, their faces set in grim determination. Reynolds took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew this was the moment of truth. One wrong move, and they would be overrun. But if they could pull this off, they would have a chance, a slim one, but a chance nonetheless. "Now," Reynolds hissed. In an instant, the quiet was shattered by the roar of explosives. Kane had set charges on a nearby outcropping of rock, and as they detonated, the ground shook with the force of the blast. Debris rained down, and the once still air was filled with the deafening echoes of the explosion. The reaction was immediate. From the shadows of the ruins, the Zeroths emerged, their eyes glowing with fury. They moved with terrifying speed, their powerful legs propelling them toward the source of the disturbance. Reynolds fired his rifle, the sharp crack of the shot echoing across the landscape. His target, a towering Zerth with spiked armor, stumbled as the bullet struck its shoulder, but it barely slowed down. The creature let out a guttural roar, charging toward them with deadly intent. "Fall back, keep them chasing us," Reynolds shouted, firing again as he retreated. Can and the others followed his lead, laying down suppressive fire as they moved. The Zeroths, enraged by attack, pursued them with relentless determination. Their speed was astonishing, and it took all of Reynolds' skill and experience to keep ahead of them, but it was working. As the Zeroths chased Team A through the rocky terrain, they were being led farther and farther from the entrance to the ruins. Vasquez and her team slipped into the structure unnoticed their movements. Precise and deliberate, the ruins were a maze of corridors and chambers, each one more alien than the last. The air inside was cool and stale, and the walls seemed to pulse with an eerie light. Vasquez's team moved swiftly, guided by the readings from their scanners, which pointed them toward the source of the energy signatures. Meanwhile, outside, the situation was becoming more desperate. The Zeroths were closing in their superior numbers, making it increasingly difficult for Reynolds and his team to hold them off. The creatures were relentless, their eyes burning with a savage hunger as they advanced. "We can't keep this up much longer," Captain Kane yelled over the comms, his voice strained with exertion. Reynolds knew he was right. They were running out of room to maneuver, and the Zeroths were gaining ground, but they had to buy more time. "Just a few more minutes, keep moving," Reynolds shouted, firing another shot that struck a Zerth in the leg, causing it to stumble. But even as they fought to stay ahead, the ground beneath them began to tremble. The air was filled with a low, rumbling sound that seemed to come from deep within the planet itself. The ruins were reacting to the presence of the Zeroths, their ancient defenses activating after centuries of Dorsey. Suddenly, the earth split open beneath Kane, and he barely had time to cry out before he was swallowed by the chasm that yawned at his feet. Reynolds lunged forward, grabbing Kane's arm just in time to prevent him from falling into the abyss, but the strain was immense, and Reynolds could feel his strength waning. "Kane, hold on," Reynolds grunted, struggling to pull him up, but the Zeroths were upon them, their claws reaching out with deadly intent. Reynolds fired his weapon with his free hand, but it was a losing battle. The creatures were too many, too fast. Just as it seemed all was lost, a brilliant flash of light erupted from the ruins, blinding both human and Zerth alike. The ground shook violently, and a shock wave rippled through the air, knocking the Zeroths back. Reynolds shielded his eyes, feeling the heat of the explosion wash over him. When he looked up, he saw the Zeroths retreating, their once fearsome aggression replaced by confusion and fear. They scrambled back toward the ruins as if something inside was calling them, compelling them to return. Reynolds took the opportunity to pull Kane to safety, both men collapsing on the ground, exhausted but alive. "Captain, we've got the technology." Vasquez's voice crackled over the comms, her tone filled with urgency. "But something's happening. The whole place is coming apart." Reynolds forced himself to his feet, his mind racing. The Zeroths were retreating, but the planet itself was destabilizing. If they didn't get off the surface soon, they would all be buried beneath the rubble. "Get back to the ship now," Reynolds ordered, his voice commanding. Vasquez acknowledged, and her team raced through the collapsing ruins, clutching the precious artifact they had come to retrieve. The walls around them crumbled, ancient stones giving way to the tremors that rocked the planet. They moved with desperate speed, dodging falling debris and leaping over widening cracks in the floor. Outside, Reynolds and Kane were already on their way back to the Orion Feeve, running as fast as their legs could carry them. The ground continued to tremble, the once solid surface now a chaotic mess of shifting rocks and deepening chasms. As they reached the ship, Vasquez and her team emerged from the ruins, their faces flushed with exertion, but triumphant. They had the technology, and now they just had to survive long enough to get it off the planet. "Get us out of here," Reynolds shouted as they all piled into the ship. The Orion F roared to life, its engines straining against the unstable ground. The ship lifted off just as the ruins collapsed in on themselves, sending a plume of dust and debris into the air as the ship soared into the sky, leaving the crumbling planet behind. Reynolds allowed himself a moment of relief. They had done it. They had survived. The Zeroths retrieved the technology and escaped with their lives. But as he looked back at the dying planet below, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The Zeroths were far from defeated, and whatever ancient power they guarded had been unleashed. The galaxy would never be the same. The Orion 5 hurtled through space at breakneck speed. The planet Zura 9 now just a rapidly shrinking speck in the distance. Captain John Reynolds sat in the command chair, staring at the flickering display on the central console. They had escaped, but the exhilaration of their narrow victory was quickly fading, replaced by a gnawing sense of unease. The artifact, an ancient crystalline device about the size of a human heart, rested securely within a containment chamber in the ship's lab. It pulsed with a soft blue light, casting eerie shadows across the walls. The energy readings it emitted were unlike anything the crew had ever seen before, fluctuating between levels of barely detectable to nearly off the charts. Reynolds couldn't tear his eyes away from the display. There was something about the artifact that unsettled him, something that went beyond its immense power. It was as if it were alive, as if it were aware of its surroundings. He had spent his entire career chasing ancient relics and lost technologies, but this felt different, more personal, more dangerous. Captain Vasquez's voice broke through his thoughts, drawing him back to the present. She stood at the entrance of the bridge, looking tired and worried. "We need to talk." Reynolds nodded and motioned for her to join him. "What's on your mind?" She walked closer, glancing at the display showing the readings of the artifact. "It's about the artifact. We've been studying it since we got back on board, but there's something strange about it." "Strange how?" Reynolds asked, already suspecting the answer. Vasquez took a deep breath, as if preparing herself for what she was about to say. "We ran scans and compared its energy signature to known technologies. We found some similarities, patterns that match ancient civilizations we've encountered before. But there's more. The energy it's giving off is almost identical to certain human biosignatures." Reynolds's eyes widened slightly, but he tried to keep his voice steady. "Are you saying this thing is connected to humans?" "It's not just connected," Vasquez replied, her voice uncertain. "It might have been created specifically for us or by us. The data suggests that this technology is tuned to human physiology in a way we've never seen before. It's as if it recognizes us and responds to us." Reynolds felt a chill run down his spine. The leader of the Zeroths had mentioned something similar in the ruins, saying that he carried the mark of the ancients, just like they did. Reynolds had thought it was just some alien superstition, but now he wasn't so sure. "Run a deeper analysis," Reynolds ordered. "Focus on any genetic markers or anything that links this technology to human DNA. And get Dr. Harlow up here. I want his opinion on this." Vasquez nodded and left the bridge, leaving Reynolds alone with his thoughts. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together, but the picture they created was more unsettling than he could have imagined. If the ancients had made this technology with humans in mind, what did that mean for the Zeroths? And why had they been so determined to keep it hidden? A few minutes later, Dr. Elias Harlow, the ship's chief scientist, entered the bridge, his face etched with concern. He was a middle-aged man with graying hair and sharp analytical eyes that had seen their fair share of strange phenomena. He carried a data pad which he handed to Reynolds as he approached. "I've been going over the preliminary data," Harlow said, his voice grave, "and I have to say, Captain, this artifact is like nothing I've ever encountered. It's not just a power source. It's a kind of interface designed to interact directly with living beings." Reynolds scanned the data pad, his brow furrowing as he absorbed the information. "An interface for what?" Harlow shook his head. "That's the part we're still trying to figure out. It's possible that this device was meant to unlock something, perhaps knowledge or abilities that were dormant within those who came into contact with it, but the fact that it seems to respond to human DNA, it raises some troubling questions." Reynolds looked up from the data pad, his mind racing. "Like what?" "Like whether this technology was created by humans or for humans," Harlow replied. "The Zeroths may be an offshoot, a divergent evolution of some kind, but the similarities in the energy signatures suggest a common origin. This device could be the key to understanding that connection, but it also means we could be dealing with something far more advanced than we initially thought. Reynolds leaned back in his chair, the weight of the situation settling heavily on his shoulders. The mission had taken on a whole new dimension, one that he wasn't sure they were prepared for, but there was no turning back. Now keep running your tests, Reynolds said finally. I want to know everything there is to know about this artifact and what it might mean for us. Harlow nodded and left the bridge, leaving Reynolds alone. Once more he stared out at the stars, his thoughts a whirlwind of possibilities and dangers. The artifact wasn't just a tool, it was a link to the past, to a civilization that had long since vanished but had left behind something that could change the future. As the hours passed, the Orin 5 continued its journey through the vast emptiness of space. The crew busied themselves with their tasks, the adrenaline from their escape beginning to wear off, replaced by the exhaustion of their ordeal. But the tension remained, a palpable undercurrent that no one could ignore. Reynolds found himself drawn back to the lab where the artifact sat in its containment chamber, pulsing with that strange, rhythmic light. He stood before it, mesmerized by the way it seemed to pulse in time with his own heartbeat. The light was soothing, almost hypnotic, and he felt an inexplicable connection to it, as if it were calling to him. He reached out, his hand hovering just above the surface of the containment field. The light grew brighter, more intense, and for a moment, Reynolds felt as though he were on the brink of some great revelation, as if the artifact was about to reveal its secrets to him. But before he could make contact, the ship's alarm blared, snapping him out of his trance. He pulled his hand back, the spell broken, and turned to the intercom. Captain, we've got a problem. Vasquez's voice crackled over the speakers, laced with urgency. Sensors are picking up a massive energy surge heading straight for us. Reynolds rushed to the bridge, his mind racing. Had the Zeroth somehow tracked them, or was it something else, something even more dangerous? When he reached the bridge, Vasquez was already at the tactical console, her fingers flying over the controls as she tried to make sense of the readings. What's going on? Reynolds demanded. I'm not sure, Vasquez replied, her brow furrowed in concentration. The energy signature doesn't match anything in our database, but it's powerful, more powerful than anything we've seen before. And it's coming in fast. Reynolds stared at the display, his gut twisting with a sense of impending doom. Whatever was coming, it was unlike anything they had encountered on Zura 9. The artifact pulsed more intensely now, as if it were responding to the approaching energy, or perhaps even summoning it. Can we outrun it? Reynolds asked, though he already knew the answer. Vasquez shook her head. It's too fast. We can try to evade, but Captain, I think we should consider another possibility. Hero's voice came from the lab, crackling over the intercom. It's possible that the artifact is acting as a beacon, drawing something to us. Something ancient. Reynolds felt a cold dread settle over him. Are you saying the ancients themselves might be behind this? It's possible, Harlow replied. If the artifact is a piece of their technology, it might be linked to a larger network, something that could alert them to its presence. If that's the case, we could be dealing with forces beyond our understanding. Reynolds took a deep breath, trying to keep his composure. The implications were staggering. If the ancients were still out there watching, waiting, what did that mean for the rest of the galaxy? And what did they want with him and his crew? Prepare for evasive maneuvers, Reynolds ordered, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him, and get ready to activate the artifact if necessary. If it's a beacon, maybe it can be used to communicate or defend us. The ship's engines roared as the Orion 5 banked hard, trying to put distance between them and the incoming energy surge, but it was no use. The surge was closing in fast, a bright, pulsing light that filled the view screen, growing larger with each passing second. Reynolds watched as the light enveloped them, bathing the ship in a blinding white glow. He braced himself for impact, his heart pounding in his chest, but instead, of the expected collision, there was a sudden stillness, a calm that settled over the ship like a blanket. The light dimmed, revealing a massive structure in the distance. A ship, but unlike any they had ever seen. It was sleek and angular, its surface covered in the same glowing symbols as the artifact. Reynolds' breath caught in his throat as he realized what he was looking at. This was no ordinary ship. It was a vessel of the ancients, an ancient relic from a time long forgotten. The ship's calories crackled to life, and a deep, resonant voice filled the bridge. It spoke in a language that was both alien and familiar, its words echoing in Reynolds' mind. You have awakened the forgotten. The time has come to choose your path, child of the ancients. Reynolds felt a surge of emotions, fear, awe, confusion, all mingling together as the voice spoke. The artifact pulsed in response, its light growing brighter, more insistent. Captain Hark voice broke through the calories, his tone filled with urgency. I think it's trying to communicate with us through you. Reynolds nodded slowly, his mind racing as he tried to process what was happening. The ancients were speaking to him, reaching out across the vastness of space and time. But what did they want? And what did they mean by choose your path, activate the artifact? Reynolds said, his voice barely above a whisper. Let's see what they have to say. Vasquez hesitated for a moment, then activated the controls. The containment field around the artifact dissipated, and the crystalline device floated into the air, its light pulsing in sync with the symbols on the ancient ship. The voice spoke again, this time clearer, more direct. The power you seek can save or destroy. It is the legacy of the ancients, and it has chosen you. Will you embrace it, or will you let it fall into darkness? Reynolds felt a weight settle on his shoulders, a burden that went beyond the mission, beyond the survival of his crew. The AI had left behind this technology, this power, and now they were asking him to decide its fate. The future of the galaxy hung in the balance. Captain Vasquez's voice was filled with urgency. What do we do? Reynolds stared at the artifact, feeling its energy coursing through him, linking him to something far greater than himself. He thought of the Zeroths, of their ferocity and their devotion to protecting this ancient legacy. He thought of the wars raging across the galaxy, the countless lives lost in the struggle for power, and then he thought of the future, of what could be if this power were used wisely, or if it fell into the wrong hands. Set a course for the nearest star system. Reynolds said, his voice steady. We're not giving this to anyone until we know exactly what we're dealing with. The ancient ship began to move, matching their trajectory, its presence both awe-inspiring and terrifying. The voice spoke one last time, a final warning. Choose wisely, child of the ancients. The fate of all rests in your hands. The light from the ancient ship began to fade, and soon it was gone, leaving the Orion 5 alone in the vastness of space. The artifact's light dimmed as well, returning to its soft, rhythmic pulse. Reynolds sat back in his chair, the enormity of what had just happened settling over him. The ancients had chosen him. Why, he didn't know, but he knew one thing for certain: his journey was far from over. The galaxy's future was in his hands. Captain John Reynolds stared at the shimmering artifact, its crystalline surface pulsing with a soft, rhythmic light. The weight of the ancient's message hung heavy in his mind. The power you seek can save or destroy. It is the legacy of the ancients, and it has chosen you. Will you embrace it, or will you let it fall into darkness? The bridge of the Orion 5 was eerily silent, the crew waiting for their captain to make the decision that would shape the future of not just their lives, but potentially the entire galaxy. The ancient ship, a massive and awe-inspiring structure, had vanished as mysteriously as it had appeared, leaving only its ominous warning behind. Reynolds felt the eyes of his crew on him, their trust and faith in him palpable. They had followed him through hell and back, but this was something else. He wasn't just deciding the outcome of a mission, he was deciding the fate of countless lives, perhaps even the survival of entire civilizations. Captain Vasquez spoke up, her voice tentative as if she were afraid of breaking the silence that had settled over them. We need to decide what to do with the artifact. We're not equipped to handle something of this magnitude. Reynolds nodded slowly, his gaze still fixed on the artifact. I know, Lieutenant, but the ancients didn't just leave this technology behind by accident. They chose us, or maybe they chose me for a reason. Whatever this power is, it's linked to humanity, to our very DNA. If we don't understand it, we risk unleashing something we can't control. Harlow, who had been monitoring the artifact's readings from the lab, chimed in over the comms. Captain, the artifact's energy levels are stable for now, but there's something different about it since our encounter with the ancient ship. It's as if it's waiting for a command or perhaps a decision. Reynolds rubbed his temples, trying to process everything. He had always been a man of action, relying on his instincts and experience to guide him through the most dangerous situations, but this was different. It wasn't just about survival. It was about responsibility, the kind of responsibility that could make or break the future of entire worlds. Set a course for the nearest neutral system, Reynolds. Finn said, his voice steady with resolve. We're heading to the Tronies cluster. There's a research station there with the facilities and expertise we'll need to study the artifact safely. Vasquez looked surprised. You're not taking it back to Earth? Reynolds shook his head. Not yet. We don't fully understand what we're dealing with. If this technology falls into the wrong hands, it could be catastrophic. The ancients were clear this power can save or destroy until we know how to control it. We can't risk letting it out into the possible that the artifact is acting as a beacon, drawing something to us. Something ancient. Reynolds felt a cold dread settle over him. Are you saying the ancients themselves might be behind this? It's possible, Harlow replied. If the artifact is a piece of their technology, it might be linked to a larger network, something that could alert them to its presence. If that's the case, we could be dealing with forces beyond our understanding. Reynolds took a deep breath, trying to keep his composure. The implications were staggering. If the ancients were still out there watching, waiting, what did that mean for the rest of the galaxy? And what did they want with him and his crew? Prepare for evasive maneuvers, Reynolds ordered, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him, and get ready to activate the artifact if necessary. If it's a beacon, maybe it can be used to communicate or defend us. The ship's engines roared as the Orion 5 banked hard, trying to put distance between them and the incoming energy surge, but it was no use. The surge was closing in fast, a bright, pulsing light that filled the view screen, growing larger with each passing second. Reynolds watched as the light enveloped them, bathing the ship in a blinding white glow. He braced himself for impact, his heart pounding in his chest, but instead of the expected collision, there was a sudden stillness, a calm that settled over the ship like a blanket. The light dimmed, revealing a massive structure in the distance, a ship, but unlike any they had ever seen. It was sleek and angular, its surface covered in the same glowing symbols as the artifact. Reynolds' breath caught in his throat as he realized what he was looking at. This was no ordinary ship. It was a vessel of the ancients, an ancient relic from a time long forgotten. The ship's calories crackled to life, and a deep, resonant voice filled the bridge. It spoke in a language that was both alien and familiar, its words echoing in Reynolds' mind. You have awakened the forgotten. The time has come to choose your path, child of the ancients. Reynolds felt a surge of emotions, fear, awe, confusion, all mingling together as the voice spoke. The artifact pulsed in response, its light growing brighter, more insistent. Captain Hark voice broke through the calories, his tone filled with urgency. I think it's trying to communicate with us through you. Reynolds nodded slowly, his mind racing as he tried to process what was happening. The ancients were speaking to Him reaching out across the vastness of space and time. But what did they want? And what did they mean by choose your path? Activate the artifact, Reynolds said, his voice barely above a whisper. Let's see what they have to say. Vasquez hesitated for a moment, then activated the controls. The containment field around the artifact dissipated, and the crystalline device floated into the air, its light pulsing in sync with the symbols on the ancient ship. The voice spoke again, this time clearer, more direct. The power you seek can save or destroy. It is the legacy of the ancients, and it has chosen you. Will you embrace it, or will you let it fall into darkness? Reynolds felt a weight settle on his shoulders, a burden that went beyond the mission, beyond the survival of his crew. The NI had left behind this technology, this power, and now they were asking him to decide its fate. The future of the galaxy hung in the balance, Captain. Vasquez's voice was filled with urgency. What do we do? Reynolds stared at the artifact, feeling its energy coursing through him, linking him to something far greater than himself. He thought of the Zeroths, of their ferocity and their devotion to protecting this ancient legacy. He thought of the wars raging across the galaxy, the countless lives lost in the struggle for power, and then he thought of the future, of what could be if this power were used wisely, or if it fell into the wrong hands. Set a course for the nearest star system, Reynolds said, his voice steady. We're not giving this to anyone until we know exactly what we're dealing with. The ancient ship began to move, matching their trajectory, its presence both awe-inspiring and terrifying. The voice spoke one last time. A final warning: choose wisely, child of the ancients. The fate of all rests in your hands. The light from the ancient ship began to fade, and soon it was gone, leaving the Orion 5 alone in the vastness of space. The artifact's light dimmed as well, returning to its soft, rhythmic pulse. Reynolds sat back in his chair, the enormity of what had just happened settling over him. The ancients had chosen him. Why, he didn't know, but he knew one thing for certain: his journey was far from over. The galaxy's future was in his hands. Captain John Reynolds stared at the shimmering artifact, its crystalline surface pulsing with a soft, rhythmic light. The weight of the ancient's message hung heavy in his mind. The power you seek can save or destroy. It is the legacy of the ancients, and it has chosen you. Will you embrace it, or will you let it fall into darkness? The bridge of the Orion 5 was eerily silent, the crew waiting for their captain to make the decision that would shape the future of not just their lives, but potentially the entire galaxy. The ancient ship, a massive and awe-inspiring structure, had vanished as mysteriously as it had appeared, leaving only its ominous warning behind. Reynolds felt the eyes of his crew on him, their trust and faith in him palpable. They had followed him through hell and back, but this was something else. He wasn't just deciding the outcome of a mission, he was deciding the fate of countless lives, perhaps even the survival of entire civilizations. Captain Vasquez spoke up, her voice tentative, as if she were afraid of breaking the silence that had settled over them. We need to decide what to do with the artifact. We're not equipped to handle something of this magnitude. Reynolds nodded slowly, his gaze still fixed on the artifact. I know, Lieutenant, but the ancients didn't just leave this technology behind by accident. They chose us, or maybe they chose me for a reason. Whatever this power is, it's linked to humanity, to our very DNA. If we don't understand it, we risk unleashing something we can't control. Harlow, who had been monitoring the artifact's readings from the lab, chimed in over the comms. Captain, the artifact's energy levels are stable for now, but there's something different about it since our encounter with the ancient ship. It's as if it's waiting for a command, or perhaps a decision. Reynolds rubbed his temples, trying to process everything. He had always been a man of action, relying on his instincts and experience to guide him through the most dangerous situations, but this was different. It wasn't just about survival. It was about responsibility, the kind of responsibility that could make or break the future of entire worlds. Set a course for the nearest neutral system. Reynolds. Finn said, his voice steady. With resolve. We're heading to the Tronies cluster. There's a research station there with the facilities and expertise we'll need to study the artifact safely. Vasquez looked surprised. You're not taking it back to Earth? Reynolds shook his head. Not yet. We don't fully understand what we're dealing with. If this technology falls into the wrong hands, it could be catastrophic. The ancients were clear this power can save or destroy until we know how to control it. We can't risk letting it out into the galaxy. Vasquez and the rest of the crew nodded in agreement, relieved that their captain had made a decision. The tension in the air eased slightly, but there was still an underlying sense of dread. They were venturing into uncharted territory, and the risks were higher than any of them had ever faced. As the Orion Phi altered course and accelerated toward the Tronies cluster, Reynolds allowed himself a moment of reflection. He thought about the Zeroths, those fierce warriors who had guarded the secrets of the ancients with their lives. He wondered if they too had been chosen by the ancients, or if they were merely pawns in a game that spanned millennia. Hours passed, the ship systems humming quietly as it traversed the vastness of space. The crew settled into their routines, but the sense of anticipation lingered. They all knew that whatever awaited them at the research station, it would be unlike anything they had ever encountered. Finally, the Trigonus cluster came into view, a sprawling nebula of swirling colors and distant stars, with a small research station orbiting a barren, rocky planet. At its center, the station was an isolated outpost far from the conflicts and politics of the galaxy, a place where the brightest minds worked in secrecy to unlock the mysteries of the universe. The Orion 5 docked with the station, its crew greeted by a small team of scientists and technicians who had been alerted to their arrival. Dr. Anna Kuroda, the station's lead scientist, was a sharp, no-nonsense woman with a reputation for brilliance. She wasted no time in getting down to business. Captain Reynolds, we've been briefed on your situation, Dr. Kuroda said as she led Reynolds and his team through the sterile, brightly lit corridors of the station. The artifact you've brought with you is unlike anything we've ever seen. We're prepared to begin a full analysis is immediately. Reynolds nodded. Thank you, Doctor. We need to understand what this artifact is, how it works, and most importantly, how to control it. The ancients left it behind for a reason, and I believe it's tied to our very existence. Dr. Koda glanced at him sharply. You're suggesting that this technology is somehow linked to humanity's origins? Not just humanity, Reynolds replied. The Zeroths, too, they have a connection to it, and they've been guarding it for centuries. The ancients created it for a purpose, and I need to know what that purpose is before we decide what to do with it. Kuroda led them into a large state-of-the-art lab, where the artifact was carefully placed in a containment field. The scientists immediately began their analysis, running scans and tests while the artifact hovered silently, its light pulsing softly. Hours turned into days as the research team worked around the clock, deciphering the complex patterns and energy signatures of the artifact. Reynolds spent most of his time in the lab, observing the process, his mind constantly racing with questions. What had the ancients intended? What power did this artifact truly hold? And why had they been chosen to find it? Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Dr. Kuroda approached Reynolds with a solemn expression. Captain, we've made a breakthrough, she said. The artifact is more than just a power source or an interface. It's a key to unlocking something far greater. Reynolds felt a chill run down his spine. A key to what? Kuroda took a deep breath. We believe it's a key to a vast network of ancient technologies spread across the galaxy. This network could potentially control or influence entire star systems. The artifact you found is just one piece of the puzzle, but it's the central piece. Whoever controls this artifact could theoretically control the entire network. Reynolds stared at her, the enormity of the situation sinking in, and what would that mean for the galaxy? It could mean anything, Kuroda replied, peace, prosperity, or destruction on a scale we can't even imagine. The ancients were far more advanced than we are. If their technology were to fall into the wrong hands, she didn't need to finish the sentence. Reynolds understood the implications all too well. This was the kind of power that could reshape the galaxy for better or worse, and now it was in his hands. As Reynolds pondered his next move, the station's comms crackled to life. A frantic voice filled the room, causing everyone to freeze. Dr. Kuroda, we've detected multiple ships approaching the station. They're heavily armed and on an intercept course. Reynolds's heart sank. He knew who it was before the words were even spoken. The galaxy's most powerful factions had somehow learned of the artifact's existence, and now they were coming to take it by force. Captain, we have to defend the station, Vasquez said, her voice filled with urgency, but we can't hold off that many ships for long. Reynolds' mind raced as he considered their options. They could try to fight, but it would be a losing battle. They could try to flee, but the artifact would still be a target, and there would be no escaping the factions that sought it. Then an idea began to form in his mind. It was risky, posse, even suicidal, but it might be their only chance. Dr. Kuroda, Reynolds said, his voice steady, can we activate the artifact's full potential? Use it to protect the station and ourselves? Kuroda hesitated, then nodded. Slowly, it's possible, but we don't fully understand the consequences. The artifact could release a massive energy wave, or it could trigger a chain reaction that we can't control, but it's also our best chance at survival. Reynolds turned to his crew, seeing the determination in their eyes. They trusted him, and he wasn't going to let them down. Do it, he said. Activate the artifact. The scientists scrambled to their stations, entering commands into the consoles as the artifact began to glow more brightly, its light intensifying until it was almost blinding. The containment field dissolved, and the artifact floated freely in the center of the lab, humming with raw power. Outside, the attacking ships closed in, their weapons charging for an all-out assault. The station's defenses activated, but they were outmatched, outgunned. Energy levels are spiking, Harlow reported, his voice tense. The artifact is creating a field around the station. The lab screens lit up with readings as the artifact unleashed its power. A shimmering field of light expanded outward, enveloping the station, and the attacking ships fired their weapons, but the energy was absorbed by the artifact's protective field, harmlessly fading away. Reynolds watched in amazement as the light from the artifact grew brighter, expanding further into space. The attacking ships were trapped in the field, their systems shutting down, leaving them floating helplessly. We've done it, Vasquez shouted. The artifact is protecting us. But even as the crew celebrated, Reynolds felt uneasy. The artifact was powerful, but unpredictable. What if they were only delaying the inevitable? What if its true power was even more dangerous than they understood? Shut it down, Reynolds ordered, his voice breaking through the excitement. We need to stop this before it goes too far. The scientists worked quickly to power down the artifact, but it was no use. The device seemed to have a life of its own, and its energy levels kept rising. The field around the station began to pulse, sending shock waves through space. Captain, we're losing control, Harlow shouted. The artifact is reacting to something. Reynolds felt a cold fear wash over him. He realized the artifact wasn't just a tool, it was a beacon, calling out to something beyond their understanding. Evacuate the station, Reynolds ordered. Get everyone to the escape pods now. The crew sprang into action, abandoning their stations as alarms rang throughout the facility. Reynolds stayed behind, watching the artifact pulse with a dark light. He knew he couldn't leave it behind like this. Captain, we have to go, Vasquez called, her voice desperate, But Reynolds shook his head. I'm not letting this thing fall into anyone else's hands. I'm ending this now. Before Vasquez could argue, Reynolds grabbed a pulse rifle and aimed it at the artifact. He hesitated for a moment, but then squeezed the trigger. The shot hit the artifact right in the center, and for a brief moment, nothing happened. Then the artifact exploded in a blinding flash of light, sending a shockwave through the station. The energy field collapsed, and the artifact shattered into thousands of pieces, all disintegrating into nothing. Reynolds was thrown to the ground by the force of the blast, and alarms blared as the station shook violently. The energy surge from the artifact's destruction overloaded the station's systems, and they were moments away from total collapse. Vasquez rushed to his side, pulling him to his feet. We have to go now. Together, they ran for the escape pods, the corridors filled with smoke and the sounds of failing systems. They reached the pods just as the station began to fall apart. They launched the pod, and as it sped away, Reynolds watched in silence as the facility exploded, sending debris flying into space. The artifact was gone, its power extinguished, but so were the hopes of unlocking the secrets of the ancients. As the pod drifted through space, Reynolds felt a deep sense of loss but also relief. The artifact had been too dangerous and powerful to control. In the end, he made the only choice he could, to destroy it before it could destroy them all. Vasquez placed a hand on his shoulder, her expression understanding. You did the right thing, Captain. Reynolds nodded slowly, though the weight of the decision still felt heavy. I hope so, he said quietly. The pod continued its journey through the stars toward a nearby colony, where they could regroup and plan their next move. The galaxy was safe for now, but Reynolds knew that the legacy of the ancients was far from over. There would be others seeking their power, willing to do anything to unlock the secrets of the past. But for now, he had done his part and made the choice he believed was right. As the stars stretched out before them, Captain John Reynolds allowed himself to hope for a future where the mistakes of the past would not be repeated and where the power of the ancients would remain a memory, not a weapon. In that hope, he found a sense of peace.